to be in Niagara Falls. This is actually where my own education started, right here in the Falls, just up Orchard Avenue. I went to school for the primary grades at a school, Barker Street Public School. I don't know if any of you remember that school. It actually was replaced later on by Battlefield Public School. And so I really started here, and it's really coming back full circle to be back in the Falls. And also, over the last 6 months, we've had some wonderful experiences working and collaborating with iHub Niagara and District School Board of Niagara on a really innovative new program, which is the core of what we're going to talk about today, called Six Social, which we've been prototyping over the last 6 months in partnership with school boards and community groups across the country. We're going to share some of what we've learned and give you some great takeaways that you can bring back to your classroom from this work. First of all, I want to acknowledge the traditional territories that we're on here today, that we're very fortunate to be able to share, and I'll show you a brief presentation about that. Oops, looks like I went too far. That short video was put together by Alyssa General. Alyssa is a young video and graphic artist who lives and calls home Six Nations of the Grand River. And she is one of 4 young artists from Six Nations who are collaborating with Learning Through the Arts. And she's really a leader in trying to reclaim and revitalize language and culture at Six Nations. And the reason she's doing it is because she can see how greatly diminished children's lives have become in our First Nations communities in the absence of those things. And that's going to be a big theme of this presentation. We all heard this morning from Angela Myers, and I don't know how many of you were here this morning for her very inspiring talk about the importance of people feeling that they matter. And we're going to refer back to some of what she talked about, because she's getting at something that we have observed over and over again. And our premise is that it's the loss of some traditional activities around culture, around creativity, that give voice to children, that the loss of some of those opportunities is what's diminished a lot of young people and has led to something of a crisis of mattering, which, as she documented, there's even suicide attempt rates in the United States in certain places which are very high. We know that this has reached epic proportions in Canada's north. We read about it in the papers all the time. Those communities suffer from even greater versions of this challenge, but we can all learn from the journey they're on, and it's something that we're going to speak about extensively in the next hour. I wanted to start with a little story of something that just happened to me last week as I was thinking about this presentation. And I was sitting in the atrium at the Royal Conservatory of Music, and I don't know how many of you have visited our amazing new building on Bloor Street next to the Royal Ontario Museum. Has anybody been there into that space? I really encourage everyone to go. It really is, it's an amazing and inspiring space. And I tend to like to hold meetings in this glassed atrium because it's such an expansive space. And so I was sitting there, we were talking about, whoops. I'll stay away from that spot. And I was sitting in there, and a teacher came over to me whom I hadn't seen for 7 or 8 years. And her name was Trina. And she was in the building because Toronto District School Board was holding their annual tech conference in Kerner Hall, which is an amazing new concert hall in our new venue at the Royal Conservatory. It had just broken up for the day, and Trina came over to see me, and she said, I was just talking about you upstairs. She said, I was telling all my colleagues about an experience I had when you and Pablo Joseph, who's a colleague of mine at Learning Through the Arts, came into our classroom 7 years ago. She said, I was telling everyone that was the best technology experience I have ever seen in the last 8 years. And I thought, wow, that is really pretty amazing to be told. That somebody remembers something where we were in the classroom just a couple of times 7 years later is pretty amazing. And 7 years ago, the kind of work that we're doing today, you had to be a little bit of a risk taker to come on side with it. And so there weren't too many Trinas. And Pablo and I sometimes felt pretty frustrated about that. But here we are, and I think the time has completely changed. And we see that teachers everywhere are looking for ways to make learning more engaging, using technology, looking at elements of creative process that can be brought into the classroom. And so the times have completely changed. And I think this statement here really puts it well. Show me the kinds of experiences I should be offering and give me the tools. And that's the journey we started on about 18 months ago. Learning Through the Arts had kind of been doing the same kind of thing for about 20 years. We would bring artists into the classroom, and they would collaborate with a teacher to develop a lesson plan and to use some arts activities to create engagement. And what we now wanted to do was to really give teachers more tools. So that model was fantastic, but it was very much dependent on having an artist in the classroom, which is a limited resource and a costly one. And it really prevented a lot of school boards from participating, despite amazing results that we were able to get all over this country, which I think it's sad that so many people didn't get a chance to participate in that model. So a year and a half ago, we actually commissioned a survey by Nexus Partners to look at what teachers were looking for, what educators were looking for, what CIOs were looking for, and where we could bring our resources and expertise in to help that process. And what we came to was a realization that there's a core challenge in the way our school system is structured. And so we think about learning and about what you need to be successful in the world, to make a contribution to the world, as combining some combination of proficiency and creativity. But I want to, first of all, ask this group, what would be your answer if I were to ask you that question? And so what I want to try to do is ask you to applaud to the volume level to which you think proficiency is where you're focusing your efforts as a teacher. And I'll move to where I hear the loudest noise, basically. So are you emphasizing proficiency in your instruction, or are you emphasizing creativity in your instruction? So let's hear some noise around proficiency. All right. And now let's hear some noise around creativity. All right. Now that is fantastic, because I think, again, a few years ago, if we'd asked that question, the creativity part probably people would have been more reticent about. What I heard roughly equal here, which is fantastic. And that's maybe also speaks to the kinds of teachers who decided to come to this workshop as well. It's great for us. So then the next question I had was, looking at that, is in 2030, which of these things do you think will be more important to your student success? And I'm guessing that this group is going to say a combination of the two, because that's what I heard in the earlier applause. And I think what's really interesting here is that when you talk to the corporate world, what you hear is, this is needed today. This isn't even needed in 2030 when these students will come out into the workforce. This is something that the other day I was at a Learning Partnership event in Toronto, where they had the CEOs of Google Canada and Siemens Canada and a couple of other companies talking about how they're seeing students coming out of the school system in terms of their preparedness for work. And when they were asked, what is the one thing that you as an employer are looking for when you hire, they all agreed. It was adaptability. And when they were asked what they meant by that, they meant it was the capacity to go into a situation where the knowledge and training that you've got doesn't cover everything that you're going to encounter. So you're going to go into a work environment where there's going to be a need for you to learn some new things. There might be a need for you to actually do things differently or in a more innovative way. And they want that right away. They said this is why they love the Waterloo graduates. University of Waterloo, which Google said is its #2 recruiting place in the world. They said it's because those people have, through the co-op program, have had 4 or 5 opportunities to experience real-world working conditions. And that just gives them such a head start. So that's interesting. The other thing about creativity that I want to say is that in our work over the last 6 months, we've been out talking to a lot of youth in different parts of the country, surfacing the issues that are important to them and asking them where they see gaps in their own capacity and in the resources that were made available to them. We were frankly astonished to hear that the #1 gap that young people of almost all ages saw was a lack of access to tools for creativity, whether that was the arts or whether that was entrepreneurship. They really saw a huge gap in their lives, and they were being affected by it. Time over time, we heard a 14-year-old in Calgary saying to us that mental health was the biggest single barrier to her entire peer group being able to progress with their learning. And when we dug down into what that was about, a lot of it related to a lack of authentic opportunities to express how they were feeling. It was pretty simple when you analyzed it. We talked to a group in Toronto where we held a SIX social event, which we're going to talk about later. And this group has actually formed a startup where they're trying to address the need that millennials have to go back and get what they didn't get in school. And what they didn't get in school overwhelmingly was access to the arts and creativity. And where it affected them is that as they got into the stresses of the workplace, they felt like they did not have the tools to deal with the kinds of emotional reactions they were having, the kinds of experiences and the stresses upon them. And they said, nowadays, in almost any job that requires some kind of post-secondary education, from day one, you're expected to be capable of innovation. It might be in a relatively small process, but you've got to do that. In Calgary, we partnered with Calgary Board of Education over the last year and a half, and that was inspired by a study that the Calgary Board did with the local corporate community in Calgary and other community consultations. And this was part of the curriculum redesign and re-envisaging for the province of Alberta. And what we heard from them was that the corporate community was saying, that when students come out of high school and into the workforce, or out of university, because they really saw the same thing continuing there, and into the workforce, they were not ready to move forward. They felt they were too compliant. They were always looking for somebody to direct them. They hadn't learned independence of thought. And that was what the corporate community in Calgary was looking for. And what really amazed me is, similar to this group that said creativity matters, the business community in Calgary, which, I know it's a generalization, but it's not a place I think of as, a group that I think of naturally as being big backers of the arts. They all said every student in Alberta needs an hour of arts experiences every single day if we're going to solve this problem. So that is amazing that we're hearing it from the corporate community. We're hearing the lack of it and the impact in terms of well-being and mental health on the youth. And the amazing thing is we have a group of teachers here who are also aware of it and who want to see that included in the work they're doing. So the next thing that we did, I wanted to highlight a couple of things that came up in our study of CIOs across the country. Because one of the questions we asked was, how are you using technology, and is there a role for a greater use of technologies to give creative voice to youth in the schools? My own background had been in creating music apps that were very accessible, that didn't require you to take years of music training before you could actually learn to express yourself musically. And I've developed, along with Pablo Joseph, a number of music apps over the last several years. And so I was really interested in the potential of that. Could that make it easier for teachers and students to incorporate creative experiences in the classroom? The first thing we heard, and I really loved hearing this, was how important pedagogy is. Pedagogy is central here. It's not the tools, and I think we heard that echoed by Angela Myers this morning. Actually, just before, I'm just going to set that up a little bit for you before I enter into that video. There's something that happened to us in Calgary. Apologies. Didn't quite get it.
Well, I think with the app challenge that you mentioned to us, it's important for the kids to see that there's a process, because they only see the end product always. So if they open an app, it's a game of some sort, but they don't actually see all the iterations that before in order to make sure you get the product in the end that someone wants. They don't really understand even that items are marketed to them, right? That there's a process of seeing whether or not it's something that anyone wants. So letting them know that something's not going to work out the first time, that there's failures along the way, that they have to they have to problem solve around things in order to get to the product that they want to in the end.
Just the background on that was that we had been developing, and you're going to learn more about this shortly, some technologies that we thought could bridge the gap between creativity on the one hand and proficiency on the other, between an arts experience on the one hand and a curriculum outcome on the other. And we kind of recognized that that was a really big and important challenge, and it's a missing thing in the world right now. In our work in Calgary, we're working with about 60 teachers there to prototype how they can incorporate the arts more in their work, and the digital media arts especially. And one of the first things that we heard was from a group of teachers in a school that had totally bought into the idea of using video for students to make learning visible. So this was school-wide, this was every single teacher, this was sort of grades 4, 5, 6, and they said to us, all our students' videos look the same. All our students' videos look the same. And they were very disappointed by that. It clearly was not authentic. If everything looks the same, it's not authentic. We started analyzing, why is that the case? And what we realized was that all teachers who are working video are using very templated tools. So kids are creating things and they're pressing a few buttons, and all of a sudden the software is making a lot of the choices where their own originality and voice could come out. So this is template driven. It's why so much of the culture in our world today sounds roughly similar, because it's all being produced using these template driven tools. And what we've tried to do then was to say, is there a way that we could offer something that would still be powerful in terms of student voice, but allow for greater balance between meeting the needs of curriculum outcomes and taking the time to create something where the student has more control over the choices they're making. And the way we did that, we're going to get into in just a second, but that last video that I showed you was a teacher commenting, yeah, students really need to see this. They need to see that technology isn't this slick thing where I press 3 buttons and it's all done for me. That's counterproductive to learning. I think we all know that intuitively. In the Nexus study that we had undertaken, a CIO told us that this is kind of the holy grail of educational technology, and we're not quite there yet. We got bits and pieces of it. We don't have this full package where it's something student-directed, where students are deeply engaged by it, and where somehow there's a way to track the process so the teacher can be present in the experience and the teacher can offer feedback that's relevant to the student in that experience. So think of this as a holy grail, and you'll sort of, if you think about tools you use, some of these elements are present, but not all of them. And so what we did was in Calgary in November, we put out a challenge to local high school and university students. We brought out community mentors, we had teachers present, and we said, can we solve this problem? Because it's such a huge problem. It could create so many opportunities for young people and for teachers if we could solve it. And 2 young women who are here with us today came up with a breakthrough idea. And they are going to talk next about the problem and understanding why this has been such a difficult thing to achieve. It's very complex because of the numbers of different points of view and needs, and to bring that all together into one technology-mediated experience is really challenging, as you will hear in their words.
I think from the student's perspective, it's digital storytelling made very easy. With traditional programs that we have out there, or apps that we have out there, it's very complicated with using timelines and cutting videos and putting them together. With Pathfinder, it makes it very easy, where you just swipe what you want to create within your movie or presentation.
It also addresses the needs of teachers. I think the exact example that James uses, a student would come in with a video of a leaf, and then they wouldn't know why the leaf was there, and the teacher didn't know why either. So this way, the teacher can follow the learning process as the child is learning, or the student is learning, and they can actually have feedback. So it's not a grading process where the teacher just gives them work at the end project. It's more of a encouraging them to explore and learn as they grow, and it's a growing relationship between the student and teacher in the learning process. So I work at a literacy clinic, and when I help children kind of voice their thoughts and put it on paper, I notice that there's a lot of problems because they know all this information, but when they actually have to come and write it down, it becomes these short sentences, and they use such small words, but you know that they're capable of a lot more. And so when I talk with them in a conversation, I feel like they share all this knowledge with me that I never would have expected and would have never came through their writing. So I think our app, especially the voice recording feature, allows them to share their story while showing something that they've created and put all this effort and time into, but without them actually being able to document their learning process and be able to record what they have to say about it. You would never know this about them.
Okay, well, as we know, children usually think visually, and I think this app features, which I think are very important and really helpful and beneficial for students out there. The first feature being mind maps, and I know personally I like to think visually, spatially, and with mind maps it helps me organize my ideas that way, and it also helps show the teacher in a much more easier fashion what I'm thinking. And the second feature that I think is really important is creating pathways, which again helps the student create their presentation in a much more easier manner without them having to be being frustrated with the process of creating or digital storytelling.
I was really excited about the mind mapping process of our app because as a student, I was given a creative project and I guess was too creative and my teacher didn't understand. It kind of put the burden on them to either give me a bad grade or just not really appreciate my work. But with the mind mapping process and kind of the feedback continuously through the learning process, teachers can see into the student's mind and kind of understand where they're coming from, as opposed to kind of telling the student to be creative, but kind of telling them at the same time to not be too creative, but the teacher just doesn't understand what they're trying to get at.
That really unpacked for me a lot of the different sides of what's needed to go into technology. And I love the fact that there was a notation concept there, that students could show the pathways that were underlying the presentation they were putting together, and a teacher could come in and ask, have you thought about this? And I think this is where we see the potential for all the expertise that teachers bring to be on point and really make a difference to students' learning. Yet the tool is clearly so empowering for the student that they're going to be highly motivated to do the work and to carry the basic work on, so that the teacher can focus so much more of their attention on those moments and those questions that really deepen learning and drive the whole learning process forward. I want to take a minute to talk very quickly about the magic that happens when students are deeply invested in learning. And I know we've all seen that. This is really what I think every teacher lives to see. It's what feeds the work of a teacher, and something really important. It is something also very difficult to sustain. And the fact is that if we could develop an approach to instruction that allowed for more of these kinds of moments to happen, I think it would really change the dynamic of education. One thing I wanted to look at briefly is the hallmarks of authentic, engaged, invested learning, and some of the key features. The memorability thing is really significant. With learning through the arts, we've worked all over the world, and in the United Kingdom, a study was done by a university of students who had participated in a small-scale pilot that we'd done in Birmingham area. And they went back and they looked and they talked to students who were in grades 3, 4, and 5 3 years later. And they were surveying them and finding what did they remember from their experience 3 years earlier. And what they found was, honestly, they didn't remember much unless it involved learning through the arts. In which case, the researcher said she was astonished that these kids hopped out of their desks, started doing the kind of dance that was at the core of the lesson, and could explain in absolute detailed recall everything that happened in that class. So memorability is huge, and this is where the arts are just such a natural. It's like I sometimes think we're fighting against our human nature. Our human nature is if we're emotionally invested in something, and if it comes in through multiple sensory channels, it's way more memorable. So that's where the arts and creativity are so essential. Enthusiasm, you see energy level. There's also a generosity factor here, and that is especially important with young people who are growing up in this much more socially mediated kind of culture. And that the empowering aspect is also really important. If students are working on a project and they're giving up easily, they're not invested, clearly. But if they're really so into it that they can deal with some roadblocks and that perhaps they come to you looking for solutions, then you know you've really got them involved. And finally, inclusivity is so critical. It really is a tragedy that we have classes where there's 4 or 5 kids that just aren't involved. And I think that what we're going to show is that the arts, social innovation, and these kinds of things are the way that we can get all those students invested so that the whole class is working together and that we don't lose both the energy and the talent and different perspectives and thoughts that those students who aren't included have to offer. Oh, I went the wrong direction. So next I wanted to just very quickly, this is not, academic theory. This is just from our practice, what we see happening in the thousands of classrooms that we've done learning through the arts in. I hear a lot of people say, oh, the students were engaged. And I think that's often the principal coming to visit a class, is there for a little while, and if they see the students all paying attention and using the technology, for instance, they think, that's great, our investment was worthwhile, we move on. But if you really look at this, engagement is only the beginning. That just means you've got them connected to the issue that you're learning. What's really important is to move from engagement to attachment. And what we've found is that giving students the tools to bring personal experiences and voice to whatever project they're doing is what leads to attachment. It has to come from them. It has to come out of their experience and out of their lives and into the project that you've designed for them. And finally, investment. Investment really comes ultimately from being able to see other students valuing that work. And so the more it's, again, that feedback that you get from peers that ultimately leads to you being invested in something. In the last 18 months, we've been really fortunate. We've had 2 amazing opportunities thanks to visionary school board partners and forward-looking teachers. People like Yun Cheng, who you just saw in the video, who are just the most inspiring people to work with. And we have been able to do some really exciting things. In Calgary, we're doing something that's called Design Through Media Arts. And this is focusing on giving teachers the ability to make learning visible at the same time as gaining all those advantages for having those students progress from engagement to attachment to investment. It's done deliberately through arts-based experiences. And it gets a little bit at the overall theme of this presentation, which is that it's through collisions of ideas and perspectives that learning can be really jump forward. And so this program is built around encounters with art, artists, and art making. So you've got 3 different lenses through which you're going to do an experience. And that's a really great model. And the way it works is to start with a provocation. I know a lot of teachers are using something like this. A provocation is something where the student is going to really be drawn to it. This could be seen as something similar to the beginning of a movie, for instance, or the beginning of a song. It has to really get your attention. It has to really make you notice something. And that's what a provocation is. And it can be almost anything, as long as it's really something that grabs your imagination. It then goes to noticing. And what we do then is we ask students, well, what did you notice in that? What did you hear? And this is a great opportunity now to start surfacing different voices and different perspectives. And one of the most amazing things about any group of 25 or 30 students is these are 25 or 30 unique individuals, and they're going to come out with quite a range of what they noticed. There might even be disagreement among the group where one person sees something and the other person sees the exact opposite. But that's a very productive conversation to have with your students. The next thing is to lead to questioning. Well, now that you've noticed that, why do you think the person did it that way? So now we're getting at the whole idea of intent and intention and starting to encourage students in their practice to ask questions. So we're all focused on the inquiry question as a launch point for deeper learning. But this process is so powerful because it gets students into the habit of forming questions, which is really powerful for them. So it isn't you formulating the question as a teacher, it's the students learning how to do that. That is one of the greatest skills that anybody can have in life, is to formulate questions well. And then finally, to embody. And that is for the student to be given permission, even though this provocation was a professionally built video or something like that, to give the student permission to say, here's my point of view on that, and here's how I'm going to express that. And that could form almost any form that could be taken. They could build a website, they could write a blog, they could develop an app, they could create a video, they could create a social media campaign. Whatever it is, it's again this process where you're going through and giving these opportunities for students to question and flesh out the problem and then come up with a response to it. So that's one model. I'm going to briefly play what teachers see the benefit of this program, which is still being prototyped.
Learning through the arts has really had a transformative impact on our practice. Providing learning tasks with our students that involve experiences with art, experiences with art making, and experiences with artists has really provoked a deeper thought process in how we design our inquiries. As a result, we've seen a level of discovery and engagement in our students that simply wasn't there beforehand. More and more, we see our students as active participants in the design process, working with their teachers to define their learning. It has been an affirming experience collaborating with the LTTA team. They have not only recognized our current approach to documentation, but they've also sparked a confidence in sharing our ongoing work and a desire to grow and learn and evolve in our practice. Working with LTTA artists, we are thrilled to be able to continue LTTA in all its aspects to inspire our students intellectually and emotionally, sharing with them the art of all that is possible.
So that program, it's still in prototype stage, but we're doing a lot of it in Calgary. We're very fortunate. We have a couple of schools in the Toronto District School Board we're doing this with, Hamilton Wentworth. We have a couple of schools there, and in Greater Essex in Windsor. And also we're bringing this program as the core of the work that we're doing in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities across the country. And next fall, we hope to be working in 5 or 6 reserve communities, bringing this program in, because it's about building teacher capacity. And there's such a need for that, especially in communities where there's a challenge in terms of the isolation of teachers. The other great project we're involved with started from an interesting conversation that we had with an organization called Accelerator YYC, whose managing director is now helping us launch this new event. And it all started from all this strange language, and this is getting to be very familiar. We heard the word LEAP has gotten into the NDP's LEAP manifesto, and we hear about hackathons, and pitching is all familiar to us from Dragon's Den and a number of these other things. But what's really interesting about this language is where it came from and why it's relevant. And where it came from is the startup industry, largely based around technology. And what I like to think in looking at this is that we're seeing the beginnings of learning processes that have emerged spontaneously out of the technology environment. In other words, we're into a new phase of technology where the kinds of learning experiences that you need in order to maximize the impact of the technology are beginning to be discovered. And they're coming out of the practice and experience of people involved in startups. Now, people ask me, why are you creating a new event around social innovation? What's that got to do with the arts? What's that got to do with creativity? And to me, it has everything to do with creativity and everything to do with the arts. And so what we've got is an event called Six Social, the 6 C's of social innovation and entrepreneurship. 6 C's, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with that. It's because it's been a big push for that in Ontario. Michael Fullen popularized those things. there's the 6 of them. And we said to ourselves, we have traditionally, in learning through the arts, focused a little bit more around creativity and imagination, a little bit around communication, a little bit around collaboration, some creative thinking, but we never really got into citizenship and character education. And I think the beauty of what Michael Fullen has done with this 6 C's is show that you really need all of that. All of those pieces go into forming a fully formed student and citizen. And with this new event, what we're really doing is bringing a collaboration of 3 or 4 different kinds of organizations together to form something that we believe is truly unique in Canadian education today. And those pieces are the startup world, because our event leader comes from that world, the creativity and imagination, communication, and inclusive learning part comes from our Learning Through the Arts practice, where we have really figured out how to facilitate youth engagement and communication and collaboration in a very authentic way. And some of these other pieces like citizenship and character education can actually happen through a sustained building of this program over time. I want to briefly show you a couple of comments that parents really love this program. And I think that's because parents see that what we're doing is exactly the kind of thing that their kids are going to need in the workplace, and that in fact they as individuals are already being asked to do. The iHub Niagara is really helped guide this program. They highlighted for us that this program could be a great way to have the focus on STEM and even STEAM connecting into social entrepreneurship. And people like Camille Rutherford and Anna Maria Dragoy said to us, there's a problem with entrepreneurship because it's so focused on the proficiency side of that, which is things like business planning, financial models, all of those things. But kids, especially in grade 9 and 10, and even into 11, they're not motivated by money yet. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, how can I make a difference in the world? How can I have an impact? There's something I don't like in my world that I could like to see changed. And what Anna Maria and Camille saw in our vision was that perhaps social innovation is the way that we can draw out these skill sets in young people. And we held a really successful event together here in early March, which completely surpassed our expectations on every level. And you'll see what students said about it. This is actually about giving youth voice and putting it to work in a positive way. That's a really powerful thing. We also did the event in Toronto, and it was enormously empowering. Danya Ali, who is a professor at a community college, but she also is a producer for Rogers TV, and she covers dozens of youth events, came to this event in Toronto and said, something very special here. This is by far the best youth event I have ever attended, which for us was amazing. This just came out in the last 6 months, and to see such response from people tells us we are onto something really powerful here. This is our design. So we saw earlier the design through media arts design. This one's different. This is what comes out of the world of design thinking. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And what's really interesting is we have found that you need to focus on the problem. Hannah Cree, who was formerly the manager at YYC, Accelerator YYC in Calgary, was very concerned about the high rate of failure of startups. Why do 95% of startups fail? It seems too high. I mean, yes, it's something, but that's innovative. Things may come before their time. All of those are concerns, but that doesn't account for 95%. And Hannah came to the conclusion from observing pitches by startups, dozens of them, that the problem is they move to the solution too fast. And that process of attachment and investment happens really too fast, and so then the inventor or the startup entrepreneur comes at the problem. They're too focused on the solution, and they get too attached to their solution to really hear the feedback that says, no, you missed something, or that's not going to work. And they just keep going until they basically hit a wall, run out of money, and that's why they fail. So Hannah said it's the problem. So interesting thing is we then tackled how do we deal with that in terms of a process. How are we going to do that? And this video, again, going back to Diana and Nikita and the app that they did, speaks to the process.
Our ideas changed quite a bit throughout the whole process of app development or ideation, right from the beginning to the very end. We pivoted and we kept having different prototypes that we created, again and again and again until we met the user's needs. What surprised me the most about this was the amount of teamwork that went into it. I did not expect it to require so many meetings and whatnot, but in the end, with all different perspectives and walks of life and different talents and thought processes, it just helped us come together and create Pathfinder.
Work really surprised me too, but I felt like getting the idea was only halfway, and then when we really had to stick to it and persevere through actually creating the app, because it took a lot of iterations to get it through, and then feedback, and then back and forth. It was so long that
It was very challenging, which I didn't expect it to be. And I think we all went through phases of frustration, then being very happy with the end product, and it was just a constant cycle of emotions, effort, and but in the end, it all worked out to be really, really good.
I want to very briefly, I think we're running late in terms of time. How are we doing, guys? Just about over? Okay. You know what? You can go to our site, which is sixsocial.org, and the number 6 and social.org, and there's a presentation there that really gets at how you surface the problem and really get kids so that they're spending more time understanding the problem. And in addition, tomorrow at 8:30 a.m., we're going to have our team giving 2 sets of workshops, one looking at that initial problem solving and the other looking at the rest of the 6 social experience. And we are also looking for other school boards to bring this to next year. We've done this now in Calgary, in Toronto, and in Niagara. We're looking for a couple more. If there's principals or lead teachers that would see the value in having this in the school, what we do is a 1-day event in the fall, which is designed to activate interest, and then we do a 2-day event in the spring period where students are able to bring their projects that they work through with their teachers and get additional support and mentors from the community to take it the next step. What we've seen in working with Diana and Nikita is how far this work can extend, and young people have the answers because they're close to where the problem is. So that's our vision, to try to keep students engaged and build the future of learning and the future of technology through the ideas of young people and the support of teachers. I think I'll just very quickly show you one more slide here. All of this you can find on our site. We'll just end with this.
In the future, I really hope to work in the social innovation and technology field, particularly healthcare innovation, because that's really what I'm passionate about.
developing augmented or alternative technologies for adults or children that I guess don't really have a voice, because my first degree was in English, and I love reading and hearing all the voices that people have and the stories that they have to tell you. But then as I grew up and as I started working, I realized that not everyone has the ability to say that or tell you their story. So I want to build an app or even some kind of technology to help adults that have been in like traumatic injuries or children with pathologies to kind of give them a voice to speak.
I want to end by inviting everyone here to visit our booth on the floor in the Social Innovation Zone and meet Diana and Nikita. And I'll just ask them to stand here so that you know who they are. They're shy people, but we give them a round of applause for their contribution. We're really excited that they're solving one of the core issues in educational technology, and they're looking for your input. So if you value what they're doing, please stop by and talk to them and see the app and try it out. It's still in prototype stage. And I also want to mention that, as the first teacher that we showed said, that there can be really tremendous value to having some of these young social entrepreneurs come into the classroom. And that's another thing that we're looking at facilitating, because that can be very inspiring, especially in the younger grades. I don't know if we have time for questions. Are we done? We have a couple minutes? No, we're done. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.